Von Cannon, WBT.
Hot. It's 5:05 and welcome into a Thursday edition of the Carolina Journal News Hour. News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT. I'm Nick Craig. Good Thursday morning to you. Well, yesterday afternoon, it was the North Carolina House of Representatives and their Select Committee on Helene Recovery that met in the North Carolina General Assembly as they discussed a $500 million relief bill that was taken up by the Select Committee. The chairs of that committee, Representative John Bell and Dudley Green, filed the legislation late in the day on Tuesday, and that is about half of the amount that Josh Stein is asking for. Here's how the $500 million is broken down of 7 categories. This is, again, the legislation coming out of the House. There is a similar bill in the Senate. $150 million to rebuild homes, $150 million to help local farmers repair and restore their properties, $100 million for privately owned roads and bridges, $60 million for repairs of state facilities, including state parks and prisons, $20 million for continued debris removal, $10 million for local volunteer groups, and another $10 million for volunteer fire departments in those affected areas. Again, about half the amount of Stein's $1.1 billion that he has requested to help in Hurricane Helene out in the western half of the state. The General Assembly already allocating about $1 billion of relief in the 2024 session, but as we continue to learn, hundreds of millions of those dollars have yet to be spent, and some state leaders have said that another $1 billion or $2 is not going to be nearly enough as of right now. Roy Cooper, on his way out of the door, laid out a $4 billion recovery plan late last year. All along, state lawmakers have said that they expect recovery to impact the budget and be a major funding source for years to come. This is, of course, due to the sheer extent of damage, as well as the very complicated mountainous terrain in those areas that could complicate those rebuilding efforts. Helene did an estimated $60 billion in damage in western North Carolina. That is several times more any other natural disaster, and it makes it the worst in state history. And, of course, waiting on the federal government to figure out how exactly they're going to fund this. As I mentioned, the Senate also filed its own version, or will be rather filing its own version of a Helene aid bill soon, but the internal version is a little more than is just essentially a placeholder as of right now. It contains no details on how much money the Senate is considering spending or what type of aid it will or won't consider backing with state funds. So as we have been covering for the last couple of months now, still a very dynamic situation. We will watch the back and forth in the legislature between the House and the Senate. House first off the line here in regards to getting their priorities out there, and we'll watch how that unfolds. Of course, as no matter what the legislation looks like, it will have to make its way to Governor Josh Stein's desk for a signature. We'll continue to track the details right here on the Carolina Journal News Hour, where it's now 5:09, News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT. The North Carolina Council of State had their first meeting of 2025 earlier this week. To get some details on that, it's my pleasure to welcome Teresa Opeka from CarolinaJournal.com to the News Hour this morning. Teresa, the Council of State is a very important function here across North Carolina. Can you tell our audience this morning what exactly is the Council of State and why is it relevant in regards to government?
Sure, and good morning, Nick. So Council of State is made up of 10 elected officials from North Carolina. It's part of the executive branch of North Carolina state government. So that ranges from, of course, governor, which is now Josh Stein, to everybody from state treasurer. You've got the auditor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, labor commissioner, insurance commissioner. So it's all those offices at the top that make up the Council of State. And they do have Council of State meetings. Well, we'll talk about that. Normally, they're scattered in between, but they're held throughout the year to discuss different important matters of business. Usually in the beginning of the meeting, they'll go over minutes from the previous meeting, anything else that's maybe come up that they've already had a look at in their agenda. and then they go around the table like a round table to discuss the different agents, the different, like I said, the lieutenant governor has anything to say, state treasurer has anything to say, they go and talk about that. So that's generally what the Council of State does at those meetings and what they're made up of.
So now we know that, of course, legislation happens in the General Assembly. Does the Council of State vote or have any say on legislation that gets enacted, or is this more of a meeting of these top-level agencies across the state? Do they do anything in regards to lawmaking?
They don't do anything as far as lawmaking is concerned, but they can approve things like in the State Department of Transportation, because that's the one thing. It was a little surprising for me when I, looked at this, that NCDOT is not a part of this. I guess because maybe that they are actually appointed. So they can, approve different things that have come up if Council of State decided to agree to maybe passing funding for property matters that's regarding DOT. Like there are certain aspects that they can approve or not approve. But as far as passing legislation, they don't do that. No.
One of the things that people might be familiar with in regards to the Council of State, and you've got to go back at this point almost 4+ years ago, Teresa, is declarations of state of emergencies like you had during COVID-19. I remember there was a lot of discussion about the Council of State during that time.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Absolutely, yeah. So, in fact, they passed legislation on that they had to now, because Governor Cooper go ahead and had the, so many restrictions when it came to the pandemic. So to get a full agreement from all Council of State members, how long they can have a state of emergency. I forget the exact timing now, but that has passed. Legislation has passed as a result of Governor Cooper's, his actions for the pandemic.
So now we know a little bit about the Council of State, as folks are familiar with, looking back at the November election, there are a lot of new members that hold these various positions, from treasurer to auditor to labor commissioner, a bunch of new faces in the room. Tell us what you learned from the meeting earlier this week.
Sure. So it was quite the interesting meeting. Like I said, normally in the beginning of the meeting, they go over minutes, they go over some things that maybe they will show the agenda on the screen. You can watch the meeting, the public can watch it and see what's going on. And as Governor Stein said, the matters that they were already shared with Council of State well in advance. And, normally, and they've gone over it. They've already asked questions. So don't be surprised if this goes a little fast in the beginning. And normally it does, but this week it did not, because we had State Auditor Boliek. He had many questions when it regarded to items on the agenda. He questioned the way things were worded, because he said it wasn't really clear. One in particular was something on the right-of-way agenda for NCDOT. It seemed like, from how he read it, that the state paid more for pieces of land than what they were selling it. So he said no. After someone from DOT explained to him that wasn't correct, he said, it really would be helpful if you basically articulated for the public as presented. It looks like we're buying and selling for less than what we paid. He says it's just the way the wording was not really clear. It's just like, I don't know if they were trying, no one really ever questioned that. From all the Council of State meetings that I've been covering, this is the first time any of the Council of State members ever questioned the wording of that. And he even said, if anybody else here on the council understands this, you're not telling the truth. He said, because it's just, you can't understand the way they had that worded. So that was one of the issues that was brought up.
And we'll get into some of those other issues coming up here in just a few minutes. Teresa Opeka from CarolinaJournal.com joins us on the Carolina Journal News Hour. Where it's now 5:14, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. It's time for a look at traffic on this Thursday morning with Boomer Von Cannon.
Hey, thank you.
WBT.
Your emergency situation station.
It's 5:20. Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour. News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT. Yesterday, a bill filed by North Carolina Senators Ralph Hines, Carl Ford, and Amy Gailey would allow students attending private or homeschool to play sports or other curricular activities at their local public school. It would also allow public school kids to play at different public schools if theirs does not offer the specific activity. Senate Bill 48, titled the Access to Sports and Extracurriculars for All, aims to expand opportunity for students attending public, private, or home schools that lack specific interscholastic athletic programs or some of those extracurricular activities. Under the bill, students enrolled in schools without a particular sport or activity would be permitted to participate in that program at a nearby public high school offering it. Specifically, if a public high school does not offer a certain sport, its students may join the sports at the closest public high school that provides the program, adhering to the same terms and conditions as regularly enrolled students. Similarly, private and homeschool students would be allowed to participate in sports at their designated base public high school. If that school lacks the desired programs, then they may also join the nearest school as well under those same conditions. The bill also permits these public high schools to charge a reasonable participation fee to non-enrolled students as determined by the local Board of Education. Additionally, the bill mandates that local boards of education publish a schedule of approval fees, charges, and solicitations, including those for non-enrolled students participating in sports and extracurricular activities. These schedules must be posted on the local school administration's website by October the 15th of each school year and updated within 30 days of any revision. Senate Bill 48 has been referred to the Committee on Rules and Operations of the Senate for further consideration. If enacted, the legislation would take effect immediately and apply with the beginning of the 25-26 school year. You can read more on that legislation this morning by visiting our website, carolinajournal.com, where it's now 5:23. News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT. Continuing our discussion this morning on the first Council of State meeting here in North Carolina in 2025 with, of course, many new members assuming positions on the Council of State. We are joined this morning by Teresa Opeka over at carolinajournal.com. Teresa, before the break, we were talking about State Auditor Dave Boliek, who's newly in that position, with some questions about the agenda. What else did we learn from the new State Auditor during the meeting?
Sure. So we were going over all of that, how he wanted some wording a little bit more clear. And he also talked about holding he was proud of his staff. He talked like the roundtable discussion, proud of the staff that he has and that they're going to be holding government accountable at all levels in North Carolina. Kind of North Carolina's, well, and you want to say Doge, if you will, which is a good thing. You know, I think the accountability is going to be a really good thing for all the different offices in the state. He also thanked Governor Stein for his collaboration on monitoring the funds that are going out to Western North Carolina for Hurricane Helene recovery. And what he said is so we can keep a true account and not get into a situation where 6 years from now we're asking where did the money go, more or less referencing Encore, which has been a total disaster when trying to get recovery for hurricane victims of Hurricanes Matthew and Florence in eastern North Carolina. You know, and Stein came back later and said, yep, we appreciate working with you. We're trying to get as much information out as quickly as we can. We want to do that on a regular basis. We're going to have a public dashboard for every North Carolina resident to see that we're doing the best job we can with this. And we all want this to be done immediately with perfection. So, you know, it kind of went over that too, how he's going to be keeping an eye on not only, and he said not only Western North Carolina for the GROW NC for that office that Stein set up to watch hurricane recovery funds out there for Hurricane Helene relief, but also for Encore. Bullock said he's going to definitely be keeping an eye on them in the future now as well.
Teresa, you foreshadowed a little bit in our first segment about how often they meet. There were some questions raised by the new labor commissioner and Luke Farley about that. What did you make of that conversation?
Sure. So he raised the question, you know, that there are only 6 meetings scheduled for this year. And he said there's plenty of work to do, lots of work to do, and he can't understand why there are only that limited amount of meetings. He said he understood that they always used to meet on a monthly basis. He said he would like to see them go back to that because there is so much work to do. And he said key example of that, touching on, Hurricane Helene again, they had to approve a claim for Western Carolina University. It was a $2 million claim, another one for App State. And he said, so if the agendas are going to include things like that, they really want to speed up Hurricane Helene recovery, like paying out insurance proceeds. So he says, I can't understand when you've got something so important as all this going on, why there are so fewer meetings. So he said he would like to get that done. In fact, he said with the stuff on the agenda, they actually should have met last month right after they were sworn in. So he was touching on that. They're definitely going to need more time. And he also said, too, as far as touching on what Dave Boliek said earlier in the meeting, about things not being clear. He says, we should really have more time to look at the agenda. He says, I'm not really an auditor, but, he thinks that there should be more time for looking at the agenda and definitely more meetings. I mean, you could agree on that. There's so many important issues, obviously, but there's even more now with Hurricane Helene recovery going on.
Well, and this, unfortunately, Teresa, rolls back to something that you and I have talked a lot about over the last 6 months, whether it was NCORE or Grow NC or just in general, the response to this, the revolving thread, the recurring thread, rather, is that government, unfortunately, works at a snail's pace in regards to a lot of this. And in the meantime, you've got folks that are still in desperate need of help, even 6 months after Helene or 8 years after storms like Hurricane Matthew.
Right. It's very commonplace, as you say, for government to take a snail's pace when they're doing this, even though they'll talk about, well, we're doing the best we can, we're doing what we can, but then it's going so slow, unfortunately, as slow as what's going on in eastern North Carolina with NCORE. And I don't know if they're, these are, time will tell, good candidates to fill these positions at Council of State, or it's really, you want to say going all the way to the top with President Trump, maybe kind of lighting a fire about this efficiency. I mean, you're getting whiplash looking what he's doing at every day, never mind every week. So kind of like following in the footsteps, but it's all for the good for North Carolina, because as you say, what it all comes down to it, and Luke Farley said, we want to work hard for the people who elected us. They're out there working hard every day. He said that in his, speech at the meeting. And it's true, because in this, we're paying their salaries, so it's like, do the work that you were elected for. And things have gotten out on a hopeful start. So we'll have to keep our eyes on this. But it was quite the meeting. It was an interesting meeting, a longer meeting than usual. And they're shaking some things up at the Council of State this year.
As we round out the discussion this morning, so with a meeting scheduled, only 6 of them, suffice to say that the next meeting won't happen until sometime in April. Who dictates the schedule on that? When do we expect to learn more on that?
They typically put out when they're going to have the next meeting the week before, but they might ramp it up a little bit earlier. But typically that's when we do get notice of when they're going to be having the meetings. So. Stay tuned for that. Maybe they will listen to Mr. Farley and have them every month dealing with all the important things that are going on in the state.
It's a great update this morning. You can read more on Teresa's story by visiting our website, carolinajournal.com. Teresa Opeka joins us on the Carolina Journal News Hour. Where it's now 5:29, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. It's time to get a look at traffic this morning with the great Boomer Von Cannon.
Nick, you're a mess.
It's 5:36. Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour. News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT. I'm Nick Craig. Good Thursday morning to you. Well, Republicans in the North Carolina General Assembly and Democrat Governor Josh Stein agree on the need for additional funding to aid recovery and relief efforts from Hurricane Helene in western North Carolina, but remain divided this morning on the total amount and how that money should be allocated. The governor has proposed a $1.1 billion relief package, adding to the nearly $1 billion already approved by the General Assembly late last year, while House Republicans have introduced a $500 million plan with the possibility of an additional funding in the future. A key difference between the proposals brought forward by the governor and being discussed in the General Assembly, Stein's plan includes funding for business grants, mortgages, and rental assistance, as well as downtown redevelopment, areas that Republicans have largely excluded. Instead, the GOP proposal prioritizes more aid for farmers and private infrastructure, allocating over $250 million for farm repair and private road and bridge restoration, compared to Stein's $175 million. The House plan also sets aside funding for rebuilding homes, repairing state facilities, assisting local volunteer groups, and supporting volunteer fire departments. The House's $500 million piece of legislation, known as the Disaster Recovery Act of 2025, Part 1, suggests that lawmakers may revisit the issue and allocate more funding at a later date. The state Senate is apparently also working on its own version of a relief bill, though its details remain unknown as of the early parts of this morning. Hurricane Helene, as you are well aware, caused an estimated $60 billion in damages, making it the most destructive natural disaster in North Carolina's history. This is, of course, all while the federal government is expected to lead a large amount of the funding for those recovery efforts. State lawmakers do recognize the need for significant state funding to fill those gaps, and the ongoing debate over relief funding is expected to have major influences on the state budget discussion for years to come, especially given the complexity of rebuilding in the mountainous regions of western North Carolina. So as we chat and talk this morning, the only thing we do have is this House bill, the Disaster Recovery Act of 2025, Part 1, where there was some questions yesterday in the General Assembly. How are we to make sure that the House and the Senate come together on this? The House is moving forward with their legislation. We're expecting the Senate to begin a similar process in the coming days or weeks. We'll see when they release their legislation and how much they take, if anything, from Stein's proposal. The General Assembly will have to agree on a proposal. The House and the Senate will have to agree on one before they pass it and send it to the governor's desk. And then, of course, all eyes on Democrat Governor Josh Stein as to whether he signs the legislation or vetoes it, indicating that they need additional or want more funding. Right now, there's about a $500 million gap, $500 million gap between what Stein has introduced and proposed and what Republicans in the General Assembly have introduced and proposed. We'll keep a very close eye on it right here on the Carolina Journal News Hour, where it's now 5:40, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. The North Carolina General Assembly is back in full swing in our state capital, Raleigh. We're watching legislation beginning to make its way through both chambers of both the House and the Senate. And we've got some details this morning on some legislation specifically dealing with healthcare costs. To get some additional details on that, it's my pleasure to welcome Brianna Kramer, CarolinaJournal.com, back to the News Hour this morning. Brianna, regardless of where you stay or live in the state, there's always a question and conversation about the rising cost of healthcare. What are you learning this morning?
Yes, that's right, Nick. So the North Carolina General Assembly is making strides to address the state's high healthcare costs. So on Wednesday, 2 Senate committees met in Raleigh, and they both approved a bill forward that would disclose the cost of state government health insurance mandates on North Carolina employers and taxpayers. So recent studies have ranked North Carolina as the 50th state for healthcare costs. So we have very high costs here in North Carolina, and this is a concern that state legislators are trying to make some changes to so that we are not the worst state in the country for healthcare costs.
And we know for individuals, healthcare can be a major, what we'll call a budget buster, especially for individuals that are not offered that insurance through their work, or maybe they're contractors and they don't get that coverage covered by an employer. You've got some quotes in your articles from some members of the General Assembly, some senators that are talking pretty strongly about this.
Yes, that's right. So one of them is Senator Jim Bergen. He is one of the main sponsors of the bill, Senate Bill 24. And he said that this is unacceptable, that North Carolina ranks 50th, and it creates significant financial burdens on the constituents of our state, creating barriers to access to care for some individuals or families. And so he said, we understand the importance of addressing these costs, and this bill seeks to ensure that we are fully aware of any additional costs that may ultimately result in higher premiums. So the bill aims to tackle rising healthcare expenses by improving transparency around the cost of state healthcare mandates and tightening the restrictions on government-mandated health insurance requirements that end up leading to higher premiums.
And this has obviously been a big discussion at the federal level for going on more than a decade now, since the passage of the Affordable Care Act under the Obama administration. And so it's not necessarily something new, but I guess North Carolina lawmakers trying to at least put their 2 cents on it and try and provide some relief for folks here across the Tar Heel state.
Yeah, that's right. And Senator Kevin Corbin, he actually pointed that out. He pointed to the Affordable Care Act. He has experience in the health insurance sector. And he said, we saw that happen with the Affordable Care Act. We saw prices essentially double within a very short period of time. Folks were getting tax credits for that to make up. But the point is, the actual cost of health insurance goes up every time you mandate it. That's what he said during the committee meeting. And so lawmakers are pushing this forward, went through 2 committees, and it should go to one more Senate committee before it heads to the floor. And then an identical bill was also introduced in the House. So this seems to be a bipartisan piece of legislation that is going to make it into both chambers this session.
And Brianna, as we talk about these rising healthcare costs, something that our audience and listeners might be familiar with is the term or the acronym CON, Certificate of Need. There's been a lot of pushes in North Carolina over the last couple of years to roll back some of those restrictions, as lawmakers have said that some of those overburdensome restrictions from the state level only amplify some of these higher costs.
Yeah, that's right. And legislators are going to keep pushing this kind of legislation forward in the coming months ahead. They're just getting started with their session, so we should expect to see more kind of efforts to reduce the regulations and costs for North Carolinians in the coming months.
Where can folks read more details this morning?
Go to carolinajournal.com and you can read all the latest there.
Brianna Kramer joins us this morning on the Carolina Journal News Hour. It's now 5:44, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. Another look at your Thursday early morning commute and update with Boomer Von Cannon.
Hey, thank you, Nick.
It's 5:50. Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour, streaming live this morning on our Carolina Journal YouTube channel. You can take the show with you on demand on your own time by checking out the podcast. It's available wherever you get your shows. Just search for the Carolina Journal News Hour, tap the subscribe and follow button, and you'll get a new show delivered to your smartphone or tablet each and every weekday morning. It's the Carolina Journal News Hour podcast. Download and subscribe now. The North Carolina Council of State had their first meeting of the year earlier this week, and one of the main focuses was accountability and transparency. At that meeting, newly elected members of the Council of State emphasized the need for greater clarity and oversight in state government. State Auditor Dave Boliek questioned the wording of agenda items, particularly concerning the Department of Transportation's right-of-way transaction and lease amendments for hangars at RDU Airport in Raleigh. He urged clearer documentation for the public to understand and emphasized his office's role in government accountability. Boliek also announced a financial audit of the state treasury and ongoing monitoring of hurricane recovery funds, which we have been talking about a lot this morning and over the last couple of weeks. That's what we learned from State Auditor Dave Boliek. Labor Commissioner Luke Farley raised concerns about the limited number of meetings, only 6 of them scheduled for the rest of the year, advocating for a return to a monthly schedule to address urgent matters like hurricane relief, various things in regards to hurricane relief, whether it be distribution of funds or other things that need to be happening at the state government level. He advocated for that. Governor Josh Stein, it was his first Council of State meeting as well, acknowledged those concerns, emphasizing transparency and the need for a swift action in regards to disaster recovery efforts. He said he was committed to providing regular updates and launching a public accountability dashboard. I'm not exactly sure if the meeting schedule is going to get switched up at all, if they will be meeting more than the 6 times that are scheduled as of right now. We'll keep an eye on those details, and as soon as we learn more, we'll pass it along to you right here on the Carolina Journal News Hour. Yesterday afternoon, a bill filed by North Carolina Senators Ralph Hines out of Mitchell County, Carl Ford out of Rowan, and Amy Gailey out of Alamance would allow students, if passed, to attend would allow students attending private or public homeschools to play sports or other extracurricular activities at their local public schools. It would also allow public school kids to play at different public schools if theirs does not offer a specific activity. The legislation, Senate Bill 48, is titled Access to Sports and Extracurriculars for All, and it aims to expand opportunities for students attending public, private, or homeschools that lack specific interscholastic athletic programs or various forms of extracurricular activities. Under the legislation as written, students enrolled in schools without a particular sport or activity would be permitted to participate in that program at a nearby public high school that offers it. Specifically, if a public high school does not offer a certain sport, its students may join the sports at the closest public high school that provides the program, adhering to the same terms and conditions as regularly enrolled students. Similarly, private and homeschooled students would be allowed to participate in sports at their designated base public high school. If that school lacks the desired program, they may join at the nearest public high school that offers it under those same conditions. The bill also permits these schools to charge a reasonable participation fee to non-enrolled students. That would be non-enrolled students in the public school, as determined by the local Board of Education. Additionally, the bill mandates that local boards of education publish a schedule of approved fees, charges, and solicitations, including those for non-enrolled students participating in sports or those extracurricular activities. This schedule must be posted on local school administrative websites by October the 15th of each school year and updated within 30 days of any revisions. Senate Bill 48, that's what we're talking about this morning, has been referred to the Committee on Rules and Operations for the Senate for further consideration. If enacted, the legislation would take effect immediately and would actually kick in and apply for the beginning of the 25-26 school year. This is a major push, as you've followed over the last couple of years. School choice has been a major conversation across North Carolina, the major expansion of the Opportunity Scholarship Program. And with that, you've got so many more families and students attending public charter schools or full-on private schools using some of that voucher money. Homeschooling continues to rise here in the state, and obviously it is impractical for these smaller institutions to have full-blown football, baseball, soccer teams, or some of the more in-detailed extracurricular activities that you see at traditional public schools. This legislation would provide some of those activities for these individuals in some of the alternative schooling options. We'll track this piece of legislation and pass any details along to you as soon as we get them right here on the Carolina Journal News Hour and on our website, carolinajournal.com. Recapping one of our big stories this morning, the governor and the North Carolina General Assembly both proposing various relief proposals in regards to Hurricane Helene relief and recovery. The governor has proposed $1.1 billion worth of relief, while Republicans in the House yesterday discussed and talked about a $500 million plan with additional assistance for Western North Carolina. The big difference, Stein's plan includes funding for business grants, mortgage and rental assistance, and downtown redevelopment. While Republicans have largely excluded those areas, they're prioritizing more aid for farmers as well as private infrastructure. We're talking about clearing debris for farm workers and farms across the state, as well as a private roads and bridge restoration across the western half of the state. They're proposing about $250 million for those additional programs. We'll continue to track those details as well. That's going to do it for a Thursday edition of the Carolina Journal News Hour. WBT News is next, followed by Good Morning BT. We're back tomorrow morning 5 to 6 right here on News Talk 1110 and 99.3 WBT.